to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Jonathan Reynolds is an associate professor of retail marketing at the University of Oxford. There at the same university is also the deputy dean of the SAIS Business School. The SAIS Business School is the business school belonging to the University of Oxford. And there also he's in charge, he's the academic director of the Oxford Institute of Retail Management. Dr. Reynolds' teaching and research focus primarily on the retail sector. He's a leading academic expert in the retail sector and internationally recognized for his scholarship and expertise in the areas of e-commerce, digital marketing, e-business, omni-channel retailing, as well as in innovation and entrepreneurship in retailing. His views are sought after by businesses, policymakers, and the media. Dr. Reynolds, thank you so much for your willingness to participate, to come to Barcelona, to participate in this event, and to share with us all your knowledge, your expertise, and your views on retailing. So now I would like to give the floor to our speaker. This afternoon, I would say, Professor Jonathan Reynolds, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Imran, and if we can get the microphone working, I think that's, yeah, that's good, thank you. And let me do the most important thing, which is to start my timer, because there's no clock in here, to make sure I finish on time. There we go. And it's a real delight to be back here in Barcelona. I was in this building about 5 years ago doing some work with Inma and a presentation on what was then called multi-channel retailing. Of course, we've had to change the language to omni-channel retailing since then. It's compulsory to change the language every now and again on these things. But it's a real pleasure to be back talking a bit about the impact of changes in retail landscape on our cities and urban places. And over the next 45 minutes, what I would like to do is to do 4 things. I want, first of all, to remind you what I think is on retailers' minds. What are the preoccupations of some of our leading retailers worldwide? What are their development priorities and thinking ahead about new investments, about new developments? Secondly, I want to talk about the new retail landscape, and in particular, some of the ways in which consumers are seeking to engage differently with retailing and with new competitors in retailing. In some senses, everyone is a retailer now. So the kind of definition of retailing has changed quite significantly over the last few years. Partly because, secondly, of technological change, but also because we have seen, as a result, new business models developing. And I want to talk a bit about some of those business models. Thirdly, I want to talk about what this means for the physical store. We've seen so many forecasts that say the physical store is dead. I disagree. I think retailing has always been about change, but now we have to ask ourselves, what role does the physical store play in the new retail ecosystem? And I want to give you some examples of the kinds of advantages the retail store still has in an omni-channel world. And finally, and perhaps most importantly for this audience, I want to talk about some of the lessons for cities. I think there are 3 important ones, and whilst I don't want to provide any definitive suggestions for solutions, because each will vary city by city, I want to give a steer which I hope we can take forward into the questions and discussion that we have after this session. Now, I have to be a bit careful here. If I walk around too much, if I disappear, I'll fall off back here to the steps. So if I do disappear, please come and rescue me. So, let's make it start. And apologies, this may be a little small, but I'll point out the key features of what I'm talking about here. And in a book I wrote a couple of years ago, one of the things that I was very clear about is that the retail industry globally is in an era of profound and perhaps unprecedented change. Retailing has always been about change. In fact, it's a necessary part of what retailing does. But I think we've seen bigger pressures on the sector than we have done for a great many years previously. Let's first of all ask a question. What keeps retailers awake at night? We did some research last year with the World Retail Congress, which was in Dubai in 2017. We asked global CEOs what kept them awake at night. Here's what they said last year. Perhaps given this week's events in the US, it wouldn't be too far from this year either. And the larger the wording, the more important the factor. So Trump actually is the most important global challenge apparently to retail CEOs, as perhaps to many others. But also what is interesting here is the fact that technology doesn't really appear on this map. Now we might say that's because perhaps retail CEOs don't understand the threat of technology. They are the traditional retailers rather than the retailers of today and tomorrow. But we might also argue that actually best retail CEOs see technology not as an end in itself, but a means to an end. And therefore the concerns that they have are the same as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, which is actually about economic forces, it's around political and regulatory pressures acting on the sector, it's around the environment, it's around the competition, and it's around the market. So many of these things don't really change. It's simply that the advent of particular kinds of technology has made, if you like, speeded up some of the impact of these processes. And when we then ask retailers what are the most important areas of their business for development, well, it's perhaps not surprising that the biggest response is around customer. Now again, we might say, well surely, here are the world's largest and most respected retailers. Surely they understand their customers, don't they? Otherwise they would not be successful. The challenge here, I think, is that the customer's behaviour is changing. Not in fundamental ways, but again in terms of its speed and agility, the knowledge of the customer has shifted. And that has created a different power relationship between the retail brand and the customer, with the shift towards the customer. And on this chart, the areas for development, we can see technology. But larger than technology is product. So again, if you think what a retailer, if we define a retailer, what is a retailer good at? A good retailer is a curator. We use that word in English quite recently now to describe things that online retailers do. They curate products. But actually, what is a curator? It's what a retailer has always done, which is buy an appropriate assortment of goods or services that it thinks will match the needs of its target customers. And that can be done through stores, that can be done online, that can be done through a variety of channels. So in some senses, continuing to invest in the customer, continuing to invest in the product, and perhaps now also thinking about what are the technology investments that are required, is where the focus now is for retail firms. But such has been the level of change and speed of change that we have seen some significant changes in the landscape, meaning that we have winners and losers. So companies that have made the wrong investments in, or have not made investments into these particular areas. Now I'll just show you an example from the UK of who are the winners and losers in this situation in the UK, and also where is the winning and losing taking place in terms of location, in terms of cities, in terms of places. So who first? The UK now is a market where between 16 and 20% of sales are now online. And that means as a traditional store-based retailer, you cannot ignore this kind of impact. Because the nature of that share, often it is the wealthiest, the most frequently shopping, the most attractive customers who are doing this online shopping activity. You can no longer ignore that. But we can no longer ignore it because also we can now see the impact on the physical infrastructure of traditional retailing. So on this chart we've got a few examples of that. So the chart on the left here shows the difference between number of store openings in blue, year by year, and number of store closures in red. And you can see the gap over the last 2 or 3 years has opened up. So that over 6,000 outlets closed in our high streets in the UK last year. That's a rate of 16 stores a day. And that rate is continuing into this year. And the job losses that we're seeing as a result of that are significant. So just this year, we've seen 50,000 job losses in the UK retail sector. The Trade Association in the UK for retailing suggests that of the 3 million people working in retailing, 1 million of those will be gone in 5 years' time. So that's, even the trade association is saying, this is happening, this will happen. So the important thing to understand is, where is the impact of this being felt in terms of the sector? So we see closures, particularly in fashion and footwear retailing. Often store brands that have overexpanded into locations which perhaps are not as commercially attractive as others. Electrical retailing, where we really only have one leading physical store-based electrical retailer left in the UK. Everyone else is closed in terms of physical chains, and everything else is online. So the percentage of sales online is significantly higher for electrical goods than for other sectors. And we've also seen closures amongst those sorts of service companies, such as financial services, banks, but also other intermediaries where services can be provided more effectively online. So travel, property, estate agents, and so on. Significant closures in that area. And even amongst some of our biggest brands. So Marks & Spencer planning to close 100 stores or more over the next 3 years. Debenhams and House of Fraser, two big department store companies, again, both in significant trading difficulty because they've been unable to adjust their commercial model fast enough. Having said this, we've also got openings. We see openings in areas where, in categories where shoppers are still interested in physical stores. Health and beauty care, personal care and attention. Nail bars, for example. Cafes. So hard to have that coffee online. The things you can't do online. Bookstores have seen a real resurgence in the UK. We moved a few years back to a situation where we had a lot of online activity with Amazon. Even Amazon now is opening bookstores in the UK marketplace as well as the US. But what's interesting is if we look at the kinds of brands that are now present in the UK high streets, the ones that are growing over the last year or so, this paints a worrying picture. The only good news, I suppose, is the fitness centres that are opening up. So fitness brands increasing, gyms and so on. But the remainder are either convenience stores, so Premier, One Stop, Londis are convenience retailers, proximity retailers. What you might call coffee shops and fast food, so Greggs, Costa, Domino's Pizza, betting shops and discount retailers. That's not a very kind of upmarket, high-profile kind of growth. It's in services, it's in convenience, it's in low-price goods. And that sends a certain signal about the way in which some places may evolve. So my other question here is, where are the winners and losers? One of the things we have to invest in as analysts and as policymakers and as retailers is to think about where might we see the biggest impact of these kinds of changes. In the UK, I've been working with some colleagues at two other universities who have been trying to produce a map of what is called e-resilience, so the extent to which existing places are vulnerable or resilient to inward investment and e-commerce. And we've done that by looking at a number of factors. So retail resilience is defined in terms of supply factors, like the attractiveness of an existing centre, its mix of convenience and service outlets, the connectivity of the online offer, how far is broadband available, how fast is that, because we know broadband is a significant enabler of online trading. And then consumer behaviour. Are those in the catchment wealthy enough, interested enough, engaged enough with online shopping to shop above average in that kind of way? And we can measure these factors and we can map them. So we can actually look at an area like this is Nottingham, north east of England, and we can classify areas based on their propensity to shop online. And the extent to which a particular place may be vulnerable to online trading. Now, this is particularly important for smaller cities. I think it's less important for metropolitan and cosmopolitans like Barcelona, London, and so on. But certainly the biggest risk we see are in medium-sized cities for these kinds of pressures. And again, if we look at the map on the bottom left here, the cities or urban areas with blue circles around them are the ones that we would regard as at risk, partly because they are subscale, partly because they are in effect clone towns. They have a lot of similar sorts of outlets, lack of differentiation, and they also have a very online active catchment population, so they're more at risk than other places. So what's interesting here is that this is not a kind of north-south divide, as you would often see in the UK, but you see vulnerable places in the south of England as well. So we think that's quite an important piece of analysis that has to be done to properly understand the nature of the risk landscape. So let me think about that new retail landscape. And also just check my watch, that's good. And it was interesting to hear the comment about wheels, the invention of the wheel. Because actually there is an academic model in retailing called the wheel of retailing. It says basically what goes around comes around. So there's a cycle, if you like, of activity in retailing. And it's always very instructive to look back to see what the landscape was being projected to be like in the future. And on the slide here is the forecast of a German chocolate company in 1900. This is the Hildebrands Deutsche Schokolade business. And in their chocolate bars, a bit like Willy Wonka, they put little cards in 1900. Forecasting what the world would be like in the year 2000. And this is their forecast for retailing. Their shops would be on trains, being moved around. So we would have mobile shops, was their answer. So the shops would come to the consumer. Now we might laugh at this, but actually if we look at this, what is this? The shops have come to the consumer. They didn't quite get the format right in 1900. So we should be very careful about dismissing past attempts to forecast the future, because sometimes they can be very accurate in many respects. But in thinking about the new retail landscape, it's important to think about three elements. One is around the consumer and how the consumer is changing and putting pressure on that landscape. Second is around some of the technologies that still have to have big impacts on the retail ecosystem. I want to just share with you a couple of thoughts on that, because I think we can all speculate about technology, but as I say, technology is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And at the moment, many of the longer-term technologies are unproven in relation to retailing. But then think about some of the business models that have resulted from the interactions between these early two forces. So let's think about consumers. And first of my comments is really around the power of consumers, what I call ubiquitous customer intelligence. The fact that as consumers now we have more insight, more data, new data sources, more control over our buying behaviour than we would have had 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And that's because we have access to those information sources that will help us. Here's one example of that, those new sources. This is a wonderful website in the UK called Camel. It's actually a live price tracking platform on Amazon. So it tracks Amazon's price levels on a minute-to-minute basis, as well as third-party marketplace prices on Amazon. And it allows you to see how prices changed over time. So here we've got a sports drone. So it's a sort of domestic drone you can buy. And the price on Amazon is in green for about the last 18 months. And what we see is it started off at around about £1,300 in April, and then a year or so later, the price has fallen to £599.99. What is interesting is that the third-party, non-Amazon price at the same time is about £7.99, so that's £200 more than the Amazon price. But the Amazon price isn't always higher than lower than the third-party price. So sometimes the green line is below the blue line. So it always reminds us that Amazon isn't always the cheapest provider for a particular brand. But imagine what one can do as a consumer with this information. Straight away, we take away the challenge of finding out a reliable price. Straight away, we start to see a reduction in possible margins for retailers, because we have now much more perfect information about price availability. So I can now tell this system, send me a message when the price falls below £500, because only then I will buy it. So the power has moved to the retailer, to the consumer, and away from the retailer in this respect. We can also see new information coming from crowdsourced insight. So if you wanted to buy the book about Meghan, Hollywood Princess, I haven't read it, so I can't recommend it, but others have, and they don't. So don't bother buying it. Okay, is the answer. So there are more 1-star and 2-star reviews than high-performing reviews. So we see much more insight and much more influence helping us with our decision making than might be the case previously. Now we might argue that all this extra information will lead us to being more productive as consumers, that we actually make decisions faster as a consequence. Well, rather curiously, we don't. The research seems to show that we take longer now to reach a decision about something. How many times, if you've been thinking about Airbnb for a holiday, how long does it take you to make a decision? You're searching through all those apartments. You're confident that just another 10 minutes will allow you to find the perfect apartment. Just another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes. And suddenly the weekend is gone and you still haven't found that perfect apartment. So the productivity is a myth to a certain extent. It takes us longer because of what's called the paradox of choice. We say we want choice, but in fact, when faced with too much choice, we can't make a decision. The paradox of choice is a very clear and evident concept from literature, which we, as academics, have known about for a number of years, but it has some real implications for the way in which omni-channel retailers are going to have to move towards more curated collections of goods and services. What we've also seen are growth in a number of other consumer behaviour features, and I've just picked out 4 here that I think are significant, and some examples to illustrate them. The first of these I've described as instant gratification. What do we see when we get our phone out, our other mobile device? We see the thing that we want on here. We want it now. We don't want to wait for it. So we're much more now focused as consumers. And businesses like Amazon have been very successful in persuading us to be more now focused, to pay more for faster delivery. I ordered some nails last weekend from Amazon. Why did I get them from Amazon? Well, it was raining outside. I couldn't bother to go out. So I ordered some nails from Amazon. They were delivered 8 hours later. I was cross. I wanted them to do some work in the afternoon. And they hadn't arrived 6 hours later. They arrived 8 hours later. I was annoyed. Now, frankly, I should have put my coat on, gone out and bought some nails from the local hardware shop. But it was raining. So instant gratification is, in some senses, pandering to our worst habits and behaviours as consumers. And we see devices like Amazon Dash and Prime building on those behaviours. The second is around personalisation. We've heard a lot about personalisation, but I do think that there are some firms that are now starting to get very good at personalising the offer. And again, the wheel of retailing. Many traditional local retailers have been extraordinarily good at personalising offers for their local customer. What we're talking about here is personalising at scale, though. Where a business like Amazon, or another omni-channel business like Net-a-Porter in the UK, can actually deliver what looks like a personalised experience for a single consumer, even though they have millions of those consumers. So the ability to personalise at scale is a significant shift for many firms. Another feature of consumer behaviour that is becoming important in a socially connected world through social media is the notion of social proof. The fact that we need to turn to other people to reassure us that what we're buying is the right thing. Rather than believe the brand, we believe our friends. If our friends have bought it, that must be fine. If our social media network has bought it, if our influencer has bought it, it must be fine. A business like ASOS, which is a UK online-only clothing retailer, very, very successful in around about 25 countries now worldwide, has developed the ASOS Insider service, which is actually allowing customers to share their own choices of clothing with other customers, with virtual runways and shows and blog posts and so on, because customers trust their peers and other customers of the brand more than they trust the brand. And of course that's been accelerated by concerns over data privacy, concerns over the protection of personal data and the growth of regulation in terms of GDPR.
We tested Amazon's facial recognition software by using it to compare every member of Congress to a set of mugshot photos. Here's what we found. The software incorrectly matched 28 members to someone who had been arrested. Nearly 40% of these false matches were people of color, even though they make up only 20% of Congress. Face surveillance is dangerous, biased, and primed for abuse. It poses a risk to everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from.
I'll show you that just to remind you that personal data isn't just about ones and zeros about our buying behaviour. It's increasingly about where we are, who we are, what we look like, whether we're happy, whether we're sad. If you look at China now, you'll see, in effect, a mass surveillance society where if you don't get off the train on time, it can affect your credit rating. And your face is recognised and the database is changed accordingly. So there are some significant consequences in relation to data capture and data privacy, which we as European citizens might take a view on in terms of our own preferences over the next few years. And that requires, therefore, a better understanding of how we should engage the customer. My view is that we need to, firstly, actively engage the customer, rather than simply be passive and wait for them to come to us. But we also need to recognise that not every customer is as passionate about our brand as we are as retailers. And work that we've done suggests that whilst with the growth of shopper involvement through the new sources of information, through new awareness that we have as consumers, has led to an increase in the overall average engagement of shoppers with brands. Not everyone wants to do that. So there are some shoppers that still do not want to engage. So again, there is a requirement on retail brands to understand which customers want to engage and how they want to engage. So for example, are they involved shoppers? So these are shoppers that are fully engaged in the process of shopping, the businesses from which they purchase. They actually seek to find out about where products come from, how they're made, the attributes of the retailers they use, their values of those retailers. But they don't want to get involved in the development of the product. Influencers are much more involved and engaged. They're opinion shapers. They're highly informed and involved in the whole process. They're active in shaping the opinions of others, so they tell their friends. So we've seen the growth of these kinds of individuals. This is Zoella, who is a professional influencer. She has 12 million followers on UK YouTube. And she is now the intermediary between the teenage consumer and the retail brand. So the retail brand does not communicate directly to that consumer. They go via influencers like Zoella. So those kinds of influencers and intermediaries become increasingly important in determining how customers will react to retail brands. Now this presentation is meant to be about digital technologies, and I've touched on a few of those peripherally in relation to consumer behaviour, particularly new data sources and new platforms and so on. But I think you can also see a couple of more specific kinds of technologies that could have very significant impact on places and on cities. The first of these is really around the supply side, physical goods. And our contemporary challenge for physical goods is what we might call, in the UK at least, the last mile, and I suppose we call the last kilometre here in Spain. This is really getting the physical product to the end consumer. And clearly, in large, congested, difficult to access cityscapes, that is a particular challenge and a costly one for many firms. So we've seen a lot of investment and experimentation into click and collect activities, into drone activities, into home delivery services. But we know that this is extraordinarily inefficient. It's ineffective, it's unprofitable for firms, it's not very sustainable in environmental terms to have lots of little vans driving around, in my case dropping off a pack of nails worth about €2 to my house in a big piece of cardboard packaging. That seems to be pretty wasteful to me as well as unprofitable to firms. So cracking the last mile is a real challenge. And in China, for example, there were 36 billion parcels delivered to homes in 2017. That's up by 1/5 from the previous year. So this pressure is on home delivery. And so we see firms trying to think about how to solve this. So Amazon, for example, recently put in a patent application for one of these. It's a beehive, but it's a giant beehive with drones coming out at all levels to deliver product. This is genuine, I'm not making this up, this is a cartoon. This is actually the sketch from the patent application. Now, could we see Amazon beehives all over the world delivering parcels by drone? Well, possibly. And certainly if we look at this kind of activity, this works, as you see. This is, I won't show the whole thing, this is just JD.com in China. Delivering, including to rural China, 80% of all the goods ordered on a particular day. So this delivers packages to small rural villages in 20 minutes, where the road journey is 2 hours, because the roads are so bad. So these are leapfrogging conventional distribution technology. So we can see that JD.com in China is doing work in this kind of area. It's also doing work in driverless vehicles, for example. The JD.com delivery vehicle. You can see this in a city environment. But clearly, what would be your first concern in a Western city would be about someone stealing what's in there. That wouldn't happen in China. So we have to think about the cultural setting in which these last mile solutions take place. So there are some longer term opportunities for the last mile piece. But again, thinking about how technology will solve those, I think we're at too early a stage to be sure what the final solution actually is. Further out, then we have something like additive manufacturing. We've heard a lot about 3D printing or additive manufacturing over the last few years. But again, we're still at very much a pilot phase, preliminary phases. The exciting piece here is the extent to which we start to see a move away from bulky goods distribution towards printing in the home or printing in a centralized location. And what are we printing? Not just plastic parts, but actually perhaps clothing and fashion. That's a 3D printed dress, I believe, and indeed food. I have tried a 3D printed burger. It was pretty unpleasant. But, you know, give it a few years, perhaps it'll taste better. So what does that do for retailing, longer term? If we can print everything at home, perhaps the 3D printer becomes another utility, like gas, electricity, oil, and so on, in our homes. Quite a few years away yet, but again, something to think about in terms of the impact on the cityscape. And then, the second area of impact technology is around, more directly, impact on place. New concepts of place. Because I think we can see a variety of new configurations of place. We can see data-driven places. So, in the last few months, Amazon has opened some physical stores in North America, which represent the most highly ranked product sales in the area on the Amazon website. So this is what retailers always used to do. They would sell in their stores the most highly sought after products in the area. But now Amazon is data-driven into delivering this combination of products, which it knows from its data people want in the area. Similarly, data-driven places in supply terms, logistics environments in which we can deliver and fulfill orders more efficiently and effectively with new access to data. Virtual places. So that's Oxford Circus in London, but a virtual Oxford Circus. There are no crowds. If you've been to Oxford Circus on Saturday lunchtime before Christmas, you're like this. You can't physically move. You can there. The use of augmented reality to augment places. Some of you may have seen this before, but this is, I think, a fascinating example. How places can be augmented with overlays on your eyes. Thirdly, ubiquitous places. So we carry places around with us. We carry places around with us on our mobile phones, increasing with the growth of devices like Google Home and Amazon Echo and Alexa. We have these places in front of us wherever we want. And we have in effect a retailer on our worktop, a retailer in our pocket. What does that do to the nature of retailing in city places? So that means as a retailer, we have to focus on collecting information about our customers. So the third piece of technology is the technology that's at the heart of the retailer, that needs to be at the heart of the retailer, in measuring, evaluating, considering the behaviour of the customer and how that is changing. So again, we asked our CEOs last year, what are your investment priorities in the next 12 months? And IT was the #1 consideration. That means that we need new business models. New business models, though, are not simply economic models. New business models are not simply technical models. They are new cultural models of doing retail business. They move from being store-only to shopper-centred. They need new skills and new people. If I use the department store sector as an example, here are 3 department store companies in the UK, the John Lewis Partnership, House of Fraser, and Selfridges. Each of them differently successful, but dealing with the same marketplace. So here we have House of Fraser in the middle, failed to adapt, failed to invest in its customer insight, failed to develop an effective multi-channel business plan, was sold for about £1 to another company about 2 months ago. Selfridges, though, again, 3 doors down from House of Fraser on Oxford Street. Successful, boosting profits. Doesn't have an online transactional website. It's all about the in-store experience for Selfridges. And that's been successful in getting exclusive brands and visits to that store. Here we find a company in the middle, John Lewis. And their goal is a new retail business model. And they say, when I'm talking about reinventing the department store, I'm not talking about physical space. I'm talking about the provision of services that a department store can provide. So we're going back to the concept of what a department store is, and what it could be, reinvented as a new entity. And John Lewis is spending a lot of money doing that. They made very little profit last year, because most of that profit was being reinvested into IT, into reinventing the department store. All business models could be not about transactions, but about subscriptions. We've all heard about the Dollar Shave Club. It isn't making much money, even for Gillette. But we're seeing a proliferation of moves of business models towards subscriptions. Whether this is for do-it-yourself, Derby Smart here, sending you a craft every month, a new craft to learn. Whether it's for children, Tinker Crate, sending your children a new kit or a new bit of hobby every month. And this is one of the most successful operations in the UK, HelloFresh, which is sending households an eclectic mixture of fresh foods and recipes every month, or every 2 weeks, to allow them to demonstrate their cooking skills in a UK market which has rediscovered catering at home rather than eating out. Or, what about hiring rather than buying? We certainly see the growth of car rental models for the household, like Zipcar, but what about renting a dog for the weekend? So this is Borrow My Doggy. So this is putting the owners of dogs together with those that would like the benefit of a dog without the cost of the dog. So they work all week, but they like to walk a dog at weekends. So you could do that with this particular scheme. So again, it's thinking differently about what retailing is. Retailing around hiring, not buying. What does this therefore mean for the retail store? And here's an example of a business that has come back to stores from online. Amazon's 4-star stores in the US. Everything here is 4 stars and above, top sellers and new and trending. But actually it's been criticised. It's been not selective enough. It's been suggested that actually perhaps Amazon 5-star is what should be there rather than 4-star, because this is too confusing a mix of goods. The paradox of choice kind of kicks in. So let's take a step back and remind ourselves, what are the 5 particular advantages that retail stores have that can be used in our towns and cities as a way of recreating and defending the retailing that we need to maintain in these places? The first of these is convenience advantage. Now, even though I got my nails within 8 hours, I could have gone out and got them physically from the store, or in fact, the nearest store selling nails to my house is about 10 miles away at the moment, so in the country. So the growth of convenience advantage and the development of that can be seen in a variety of ways. So here we've got Ahold, the Netherlands, reinventing its convenience store, proximity store format, Ahold to go. Building in technology, building in social media platforms, building in replenishment, different times of the day to match different needs. Here we see our non-food. We see B&Q, a home improvement retailer, developing smaller format stores for urban areas. We've seen that with IKEA as well, developing urban hubs in big cities to act as showrooms, to act as the galleries for the products for the brand. New kinds of convenience advantages. In terms of pickup, Walmart developing this massive kind of tower, pickup tower, which is fully automated. The big challenge about picking and collecting Walmart was that you used to stand at the back of the store and wait in a long queue at a rickety table to pick up your home delivery. Now you can go to this pickup point and it's with you within 30 seconds to take it away. And then on the bottom right, in China, the ultimate convenience, this is a convenience store on wheels. It's called Bingo Box, be wheels to wherever you want it. It's the Amazon Go of China, because it's completely automated, there is no number of staff in there. You access it with your phone, you shop around using your phone, the cameras recognise who you are. If you steal something, the door locks and the police come. So it's hard to get away with anything in China, as I said. Secondly, immediacy advantage. This is a little different from convenience. This is about saying, well actually, I happen to be here, what can you do for me? So we see a number of existing shopping mall developers who are, I'm reminded to speed up, who are offering just-in-time offers in Regent Street in Oxford, for example. I'm walking along, my phone and my watch goes off, it says, Dr. Reynolds, Burberry is just 2 steps away from you, and we have a special offer just for you. You want to come through the door and take advantage of it. 20% off this coat. So we can do those kinds of things. We can also do that for shopping malls. So on the right here, Brent Cross Shopping Centre in London has an app which allows you to find who would sell something that looks like what you want to buy. So if I take an item of clothing, photograph it, it will say, well, there's a shop here that sells something just like that. Go there. So the idea suggestion comes through the app. Now I try putting my academic dress, my academic gown and white bow tie from Oxford into the system. So that's the photograph of my academic outfit, to see whether I could buy anything like that in Brent Cross, and it came back with white shorts and a black t-shirt. So it's not perfect by any means. But it is starting to be allowing us, through machine learning, to give us sensible choices and sensible suggestions, steer to physical places where we can immediately gratify our need for product. Thirdly, experience advantage. We hear a lot about the E word, the experience word, and I think it's much overused because everyone thinks that if you put a climbing wall in a store, everyone will run and buy things from you. This isn't always the case. Experience in context is really important. So is it relevant experience? Does the customer want to engage with that experience? Will they want to come back, or is it a novelty that they will get very tired of after time? So we see, for example, in Italy, I think a great example of a perennially evolving experience of slow food. We see in Box Park, which I'll talk a bit more about in a few moments, a pop-up shopping centre which allows every 6 months new traders and new brands to come through. Experience in context. Is it relevant? You want a new experience, you want an exciting visit at a particular point. That will provide it. Here are 2 where the jury is not so clearly in favour. Italy World in Bologna. I was in Bologna 2 weeks ago looking at this. It's in an old warehouse area to the northeast of Bologna. It's a massive slow food theme park for Italy. Will this work? Who knows? All we know is that Bologna retailers are pretty unhappy about it because it's out of town. So all this innovation, all this experimentation is outside Bologna. If you know Bologna, it's a wonderful place for eating, for food, and so on. Here in Osaka, we have an example of a shopping mall that sought to literally insert experience into it. This is a shopping mall designed for fashion retail, but they have put, as you see, a Ferris wheel in the middle of it. Just sort of inserted it. I was there a couple of years ago. I queued up with something like 50 17-year-old girls, very excited. I was the oldest in that group, I have to say, feeling very out of place. The doors opened, they all vanished. Not into the shops, but into the Ferris wheel. The shops were empty. So again, it's experience in context, meaningful theatre. The fourth one is problem solving. Here again is something that store-based local retailers are extraordinarily good at. Helping shoppers edit choice, navigating through complex assortments, offering advice. Some of this can be done online, but some of it is far better done through human intervention. Providing information about new or complex products, thinking about product personalization, and what we now see is many stores in the multiple sector reimagining themselves as service centres. So we find, for example, in Waitrose, the food retailer, setting up cookery schools, Leroy Merlin in France, developing home improvement classes and workshops, turning their stores into service and learning centres rather than simply transactional retail places. And finally, thinking about value advantage. We hear a lot about the word value in English, and in some senses I think it is overused. It's often used as an excuse by companies to justify higher prices and to disguise operational inefficiencies. So a value advantage is something that all together leads to the shopper saying, the store is where I will go for this. Because of the shopping trip, because of the atmosphere, convenience and service level in the store, because of the mix of products from which the shopper will get economic value and product performance. There is still a lot of logic in bringing that all together in one place to generate value, as Amazon itself has actually demonstrated. So, finally, let's think about lessons for cities, but we ought to just remind ourselves again, we have this delicate balance between technology and the human side of retailing. We see a lot of imagery around these kinds of things. Can you really imagine yourself wandering around your supermarket or in a virtual supermarket with a pair of these on your head? Now, let alone fashion retail. A survey this year in the US, half of fashion retailers want to invest in augmented reality and virtual reality headsets, even though 4 in 5 shoppers wouldn't be interested in using it. So to what extent should retailers invest in these kinds of things? Should they be leading the customer? Or should they be waiting for the customer to develop an interest in this kind of area? This is a difficult trade-off. And actually, is it just easier in retailing to talk about what customers really want? So this is actually a humorous card you can buy in a shop in the UK which says, this is a retail, hi, would you like to pay a bit extra for me not to talk to you? Which is a classic British sort of retail experience, I have to say. So what does this mean for cities? I've really got 3 things I want to say to conclude my comments. But I was very struck by some comments by Mitchell Silver, who is the New York City Parks Commissioner, who reminded us that land use planning can become a bit too technocratic, a bit too rational, a bit too economically focused. And my background is as a geographer, as a planner, as a retailer. And Mitchell said, we don't want a plan based on land uses. We want a plan based on experiences. Who visits downtown to see land uses? So I think what he's suggesting is actually we need to think very carefully about the sorts of urban realms, urban environments we are creating, and what role retailing will play in the future within those environments, rather than zone something for future retail and then worry about what that might look like in 5 years' time. So I've got 3 suggestions here. They're not rocket science, as we would say, but I think they are, if you like, a state of mind, an approach to thinking about retailing. And those are final conclusions. So the first of these is experiment. And by experiment, I mean take some risks. We're not entirely clear what the future retail will look like. If I knew, I'd be extraordinarily wealthy, and I would be basking away on a tropical island somewhere, I imagine. thinking about what that future will look like requires experimentation. I mentioned Box Park. This is a pop-up shopping mall, 2 locations in the UK. It's made out of stripped down and refitted shipping containers. It's a pop-up shopping centre rather than a pop-up shop. And one of the motives for doing this is to create, if you like, a continually refreshed series of brands. With active tenant management, these brands change over every 6 to 8 months. There are new local brands, new and exciting developments, new and exciting tenants. With active tenant management means that whenever you go, there's something new, something different, a new experience to explore, a new brand, a new local offer. Now, this is one way of doing it. It doesn't work. Well, all it's cost is a few shipping containers, rather than a 15-year building project to develop a concrete box at a shopping mall. So this is a flexible and agile solution to new retail. So experiment in that kind of a way. Secondly, collaborate. And by collaborate, this is really also about the nature of managing economic change within city environments, which of course is all about collaboration, because everyone has their own agenda. But retailing in city environments, I always think, is a bit like a Rubik's Cube of a problem. You turn one side, and the other side fails. You have to get the combination of factors exactly right to be successful. And that requires much more extensive collaboration. And in an uncertain retail environment, that's very, very difficult. Here are 2 very specific examples of collaboration, which have brought local retailers to a wider audience. So these are digital high streets based in London, where one is Near Street, it's called nearstreet.com, which allows local physical retailers to punch above their weight and to be accessible to customers outside the city. And here, Amazon, with Amazon Fresh, is working with local food retailers and producers within the London area to make their products available outside the immediate catchment area of their stores. So again, we can start to extend the catchment area of those stores, we can start to extend their economic viability, even though their physical footprint remains within the city. And then thirdly, reinvent. One of the, if you like, the unfair competitive advantages of cities, it seems to me, is their history, their legacy, their culture, and that's something we need to exploit. Whilst in London we've seen 2 or 3 very big classic shopping centre developments in the Westfield malls being built in London, we've also seen some very interesting infill refurbished developments. This is the most recent one. It's called Coal Drops Yard. It's near one of our mainline railway stations, King's Cross, which is becoming a new hub for technology. Google is opening its London office here in about a year's time, and it's also got a lot of artistic craft and design capabilities in the area. So Coal Drops Yards is exactly what it says. It's a coal yard, originally from the 19th century. It's been refurbished, again, not as a classic shopping centre, but actually, as it says here, as a place to stumble upon something new, to meet with the unexpected, a place where art, commerce and culture come together. That's all very well saying that, but bringing together and going beyond just transactional commerce is what this development is all about, creating a new kind of living and cultural space, which is only really possible in a city like this, where you have that legacy architecture, that legacy design. So reinvention is something which cities can do far better than in other places. Reinventing also, I think, in terms of thinking about the other logistics requirements of the new kind of retail that we have. And reinvention in terms of logistics. So, for example, 2 examples here. When we see the growth of direct-to-home retailing and click-and-collect retailing, we also have seen the growth in the need for returns. So how do we handle those returns? It's been a real economic challenge to many retailers. That has real estate consequences. So we've seen the growth of returns processing centres and different kinds of urban logistics real estate requirements in many of our cities. So thinking about what the real estate requirements are of an omni-channel retail ecosystem within a city like Barcelona is a really important consideration in thinking about the future infrastructure for a smart city. We can see where this can go wrong. So here in London, for example, this is an article in one of our less reputable newspapers, the Daily Mail, but it's talking about Deliveroo. Deliveroo has been very, very successful in London. It's been so successful, it's run out of kitchen space in the best restaurants. So what does it do? It builds spare kitchens in car parks across London. So you can buy your wonderful meal from this 5-star restaurant, be delivered to your home. It won't have to be prepared in that restaurant, it'll be prepared in a shed somewhere in a car park. But you'll still pay the 5-star price for that meal in your home. So there are some really odd logistics, real estate consequences of the growth in new kinds of business models. So, to conclude, I've talked really around the challenges facing the retail sector by taking a step back for those challenges, looking at the customer, the technology, the business models. I've talked a bit about the need to reinvent and reimagine retail stores. But let's try and sum this up. So we have, I think, for cities, we've seen a fragmentation of the retail ecosystem. This has been caused really by the transformation of shopper behaviours, which has created new business and economic models for retailing. It's involved new forms of competition, new businesses, new entrants. We can all be retailers now. And they're going to be winners and losers in this respect. We have gaps in our conventional streetscapes as the losers move out. What this also means, though, is probably what I would regard as a compaction in physical terms of the retail space required physically to service the customer. And that means that perhaps cities will need to go beyond retail in thinking about how to develop viable and vital central spaces. It can't just be about retail. It has to be about reinvented retail, or it has to be other kinds of activities that bring a vitality and a viability to the heart of our cities. In terms of technology, cities we know have relied on retailing to be the gateway employer. The automation of retailing will lead to that changing. No longer will the first job that someone has, for example, be as a 15 or 16-year-old in a retail store. It may well be in a warehouse somewhere near town, rather than the store itself. And longer term, if manufacturing is going to be in the home, how will retailers in cities add value to the consumer's experience? So we know, therefore, that the physical manifestation of retailing activity will be different. The scale, function, and character of retailing in cities will evolve, whether we plan for it or not. And so cities, it seems to me, need to use their unfair advantage. The 3 advantages of size, of density, of population, of legacy, to actually reinvent themselves. To reinvent themselves, to experiment, to collaborate in delivering a new retail ecosystem at the heart of the smart city. So let me stop there. I think I've overrun by a few minutes, but let me stop and thank you for your patience, and I'm really happy to take any questions that you might have.